Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about an idea that we really need to look at when it comes to different training approaches. And we have to have these conversations. Because if we're going to talk about longevity under the barbell, we're trying to talk about the long game. I mean, for example, you guys see my gray beard here. I'm 48 years old. That's a 585 pull, pretty clean. You'll see me doing a 505 box squat on a 12-inch box coming up. Decently strong still. My injuries are fairly low, even though now I've kind of pushed over more towards bodybuilding training and I'm making physique a primary. I personally still do some heavy lifting, but it's the same with our bodybuilding type training, right? As I continue to start working on my physique, to start looking better, to get more aesthetic, to get more jacked, leaner, not just strong. Something that started to matter to me more and more as I've gotten older. It's just funny. I get it. A lot of guys see it the opposite. But when we look at these topics, we have to look at not only does something work, but what sort of injury rates did it incur? Okay. And we could look at that from a powerlifting perspective. We could look at that from a bodybuilding perspective. We could step back and say, okay, so all these different pro bodybuilders use a wide variety of approaches because there's no such thing as bodybuilding training. Really, there's no such thing as powerlifting training either. I mean, ultimately, there are some extremely divergent methods. And in fact, there's probably more overlap between bodybuilding and powerlifting training than there is even overlap inside of powerlifting and bodybuilding as their individual disciplines, okay? Right? Because how many serious pro bodybuilders, how many Mr. Olympia winners did heavy singles on the big three? Lots of them. How many world level powerlifters do tons of 10 to 12 rep sets, even up in the on isolation work or more, 20 rep sets? Extremely common. Extremely common. But when we start talking about injuries, what's some stuff that we have to look at? Well, let's take bodybuilding. So you take someone like Dorian Yates. Were his methods effective? Obviously. I mean, Dorian Yates won numerous Mr. Olympias. He was monstrously big. He was monstrously ripped and dense and striated and grainy while winning the Mr. Olympia. Okay? So you can't say he didn't get results. In terms of bodybuilding, I mean, for his era, he was number one. Now, obviously, there were specific drugs involved. There was a lot of discussion of, how he used certain drugs in much larger amounts than other people had been willing to, or started experimenting with things that other people weren't really experimenting with yet. True. But the training methods clearly worked. Because at the end of the day, I think we all have to admit, all these guys are on drugs. All of them are on lots of drugs. Lots of drugs. So that's not really the true wild card, is it? So we have to start looking at how does their training differ. Well, his training obviously worked, but how bad did he get hurt? He got hurt a lot. Guy had 7 or 8 major muscle tears during his professional career. So we could look at some of that and say, okay, it works, but is it worth it on the payoff end? Make a debate about that, okay? Whereas you could take someone like, say, Jay Cutler, another Mr. Olympia. Minimal injuries, right? Minimal injuries. And I think he only had, to my knowledge, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, he only had an injury in his final year. I think his final year trying to win the Mr. Olympia again. And it wasn't even specifically on the lift. Like he tore a bicep trying to get some dumbbells into position or something for a chest exercise. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, people. I could be wrong on that. I admit that. So you have to look at that and go, but he won some Mr. Olympias. He didn't get hurt as bad. Did Lee Haney get hurt? No. Well, Lee Haney won quite a few Mr. Olympias. So this is the things that we have to look at in terms of their methods. You have to look at this in terms of their methods. Did they get hurt? And so, what's going on with their injuries? Well, with Dorian, for example, all those heavy sets beyond failure, all that rest pause work, all the force reps, okay? Probably a factor. That level of intensity will destroy your body. Not saying it didn't obviously build some muscle. I mean, it clearly built some muscle. um, Looking at his track record there and the other guys in the lineup, it definitely worked. But at what price? So same thing when we get over to powerlifting. And then Louis Simmons said this for years. It's like people get hurt. Like way more people get hurt doing powerlifting than really should happen. And yet his people lifted tremendously heavy. Okay, because it's not the heavy lifting. He always said the linear periodization is what hurts people. And it does. Have you not noticed Matt Winning say the same? Louis Simmons said the same. Louis Simmons' people generally had relatively low injuries. Not saying it didn't occasionally happen. But compared to, say, the serious linear periodization with the high specificity. And yet they lifted heavy. They did maxes every week. Even guys on that sort of training don't lift heavy every week or even every month of the year. But Louis' people did. So it's not, well, you're lifting heavy is the issue. No, they maxed out every week. Every week on at least 2 exercises, year round, 52 weeks a year. Still lower injuries than the linear periodization. Why? Overuse. Ultra high specificity. I mean, same thing. Johnny Candido beat up. Can't even powerlift anymore. So that's kind of the point. When you look at training styles, these training styles are where you do minimal amounts of maxes, rotate enough movements, and then focus on bodybuilding type work is largely what Westside did. 70% of their training was, as he called it, bodybuilding training. They lifted super heavy, but it was a very, very small amount, and they rotated stuff around. The injuries were fairly low, in spite of guys, throwing around 700 and 800 pounds on a weekly basis, 52 weeks a year. And you got guys like Candido, and people can say, well, the drugs. Well, Candido was drug tested, unless he was on gear. Still got pretty beat up and injured. Out of the powerlifting game before age 40. Okay. High specificity focus on the big lifts. Instead of, hey, can I just build a bunch of muscle? Can I build tendons? Can I build support structure? And only do the minimal amount of really heavy lifting needed to be great. Okay. And that's what we're talking about. We have to be aware of that. We have to think in those terms. So it's not just about what works, because obviously linear periodization worked. It produced plenty of elite lifters. It also broke dozens, if not hundreds of them on the wheel. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.